Hello, BookTube. Today marks the March 1st marks the beginning of the read-through of City by Clifford D. Simak, a fix-up novel that was published in 1952. It consists of nine tales, nine stories, originally eight that were seven of them were published in Astounding Science Fiction. And the final story that was published in 1973 in the John W. Campbell Memorial Volume, edited by Harry Harrison. So we'll be reading that as well. We're doing two tales per week. This week we will be doing City and Huddling Place, the first two, and two for every other week, except the last week will include epilogue. Now, I thought I'd come to you with a brief biographical sketch of Clifford Simak, who was born August 3rd, 1904, in Millville, Wisconsin, Grant County, Wisconsin, in the southwest corner near the confluence of the Wisconsin and Mississippi rivers. It's an area that has sort of rolling hills and hollows. Now, which actually feature in a lot of Clifford Simak's writing. And it's been referred to as Simak country because of that. And it's not only just appears in writings that he sets on Earth, but also off Earth, as well as place names will reappear and people's names. And especially his younger brother, Carson, does appear quite often in or a number of his stories. Uh, Now, as I say, he was born in August 3rd, 1904. He went to school in a schoolhouse in Patch Grove, and in winter he would ride a horse with his brother back and forth to school, and to keep his brother company, and he would make up stories on the way there and back. And Clifford Simak, in an interview or a number of interviews, remembers as a child wanting to learn every word in the dictionary. And I think he knew that he was going to be a writer of some sort. And with the beginning of Amazing Stories in 1926, Clifford Simak found one of these and was enchanted by it. His favorite writers, of the time, was H.G. Wells and Jules Verne. So, and he went to school for a 1 year training course to teach, and he actually taught for about a year in a schoolhouse in rural Wisconsin, trying to make his way through or pay his way through the University of Wisconsin as well. And in 1929, he married Kay, who he stayed married to and had two children, Richard and Shelley. He began working at as a copy editor at Iron River, Michigan. Was his first newspaper job, and then he started working for a newspaper syndicate, and he was moved around to a number of newspapers during the 30s. But also in 1930 itself, he decided to try his hand at writing, and he wrote a story called The Cubes of Ganymede. He sent it to Amazing Stories, and at that time in 1930, it was the editor was T. O'Connor Sloan. This story was not published, and it has never surfaced. Clifford Simak says he doesn't know what happened to it. It was sent back to him, but it has never been found in his papers. He does say it was a bad story, and it was returned because it was old-fashioned at that time. But in the meantime, he had written another story called The World of the Red Sun, which was published in Hugo Gernsback's Wonder Stories for December 1931. It was a time travel story, much in the vein of H.G. Wells, with a few twists. And he continued to write. The first year, he wrote four or five other stories in 1931, 32, and 32. And he continued to write a little bit, but then he got a little disillusioned with with writing at that time, and or with science fiction writing. And he wrote one story called The Creator, and it was more or less for himself. But a young editor wanted to start a magazine, and Clifford Simak thought, well, if anybody's brave enough to start a magazine during the Depression, he needs all the help he can get. And Clifford Simak sort of gave him the story, and that appeared in Marvel Tales. And he, as I say, he more or less stopped writing to a certain extent because he was disillusioned with writing at the time. But then he heard in 1938 that John W. Campbell was hired as editor of Astounding, and he thought, "Hey, I can write for Campbell," which he did. And he began sort of under the tutelage of Campbell, and he became a better writer as well with the help of John W. Campbell. And then he began his story, his a series of stories, the City Stories, and a number of them were published. Well, actually, 7 of the stories were published in Astounding, and the last story, "The Trouble with Ants." Um, was rejected by Campbell, and later Simak sent it to Amazing Stories, which then published it in Fantastic Adventures, their sister publication. But during the 1940s as well, he started writing westerns and a few air war stories. But let's back up a bit to 1939, where he was still working as a journalist, and he began a job at the Minneapolis Star Tribune, and he stayed there for his whole career, and he retired in August 1976, and he became features editor. He had a column. He was well respected in the newspaper community as well as the science fiction writing community. Isaac Asimov had praised him over and over again in many ways in writing, to say that he basically stole Clifford Simak's style of writing, and he had a long correspondence with Simak that started with a letter that Asimov sent to Astounding Stories criticizing one of his stories that appeared there. And at that time, people's address were actually added to these stories. And in this case, it was the address of the candy shop that Asimov's father ran in New York. Simak wrote to him and asked, can you give me more details? What was so bad about the story? And Asimov was a bit surprised at this, and he reread the story and realized there was no problem. What he thought was a problem was where all of a sudden there was no transition between where a person was and then where they wound up in the next sentence, or a change of scene. But what Simak did was left the space for that, and then Asimov actually realized that and thought that was really, really useful. So again, as I say, that began a long correspondence, and they met on a number of occasions at conventions. But in 1952, these stories were gathered together by Gnome Press, and Clifford Simak wrote some sort of editorial writings to tie these stories together, and it was published as City by Gnome Press. Very limited number. I think it was like 2,000 or 2,500 copies that were actually printed of City. And it went on to, well, in 1953, it won the International Fantasy Award. And Clifford Simak has won basically every award that there was. He was given the Grand Master Award as well of science fiction by the Science Fiction Writers of America. And as I say, he stopped writing in he retired as a journalist in 1976. but he continued writing fiction, and he would write even while he was working. Any minute, any 15 minutes that he got, he would write. He also wrote some fantasy. He's been known as a pastoral writer, but he's much more than that, and I hope to touch on this a little more as we go on in the month. Uh, but yeah, after his retirement, he, as I say, continued writing, and he died April 25th, 1988. And since then, he's sort of come out of favor, and I'm happy to say that he's being rediscovered today, and we will talk a little more about that as well. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there. And if you'd like to join in, please do. We have a Voxer group that I can add you to. You can send me a message on Voxer. It's Sean Standfast, and or send me a message or an email. And I look forward to speaking to everybody about City and other books as we continue on this year, every 2 months with a Simak novel. Thank you, BookTube.